At 8:15, on the morning of August the 6th, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Japan. The blast wave was felt as far away as 37 miles. 2/3 of the city's buildings were destroyed. Although no official figure exists, it is estimated that between 80,000 and 140,000 people were killed instantly in the blast. The hundreds of fires, ignited by the thermal pulse, combined to produce a firestorm that had incinerated everything within 4.4 miles of ground zero. Yet incredibly, less than a half-mile away from ground zero, 8 German Jesuit priests staggered out of their home, one of the few buildings still standing in that area, with only relatively minor injuries. Speaking on behalf of all 8 men, 30-year-old Father Hubert Schiffer had only one explanation.
We believe we survived because we were living the message of Fatima.
"100 years ago, the village of Fatima was a relatively unknown and unremarkable place situated in the hills of Santarém in Portugal, halfway between Lisbon and Porto. But in the spring of 1917, Fatima was suddenly plucked from obscurity and became the setting for an extraordinary story. When 3 shepherd children made the startling claim that they had been visited by the Virgin Mary. The series of events that followed would resonate around the world and culminated in what has been described by many as the greatest miracle of the 20th century, an event witnessed by 70,000 people. Today, the 4 million pilgrims that descend upon Fatima each year are testament to the global impact of the events that took place in 1917. But there is more to the story of Fatima than miracles and apparitions, for the 3 children also claimed that they had been entrusted with a secret later revealed to be a prophetic vision and a warning for all of mankind. The story of Fatima is one that makes incredible claims and at times defies belief. But precisely because of these claims, does the story of Fatima not warrant a closer look by even the hardest of skeptics?
Our Lady, she has come to visit people who were not known. Fatima had no projection in the world at that time. And so she said, I want also to tell the world that God uses those who are humble, who are simple, who are sometimes not much educated, to carry out a big plan.
Our country was always very devoted to Our Lady, to Holy Mary. Indeed, there was, as far as they say, in historical level, that there was this first consecration of our first king, Afonso Henrique, to Holy Mary. So since the beginning, Portugal is known as land of Holy Mary. She is there from the beginning, so she came to Fatima to visit her own country.
But the unique feature about Fatima is that it addresses the world as well as the church. And how did Fatima arise? It arose during the First World War. in 1917, the Pope Benedict XV sent out a message to all the world's priests and to the whole church in the whole world. He was very, very concerned about the ongoing of the war. He had sought by diplomatic means to bring an end to the war, and all his overtures had been rebuffed.
Our earnestly pleading voice, invoking the end of the vast conflict, the suicide of civilized Europe, was then and has remained ever since unheard. Indeed, it seemed that the dark tide of hatred grew higher and wider among the belligerent nations, and drew other countries into its frightful sweep, multiplying ruin and massacre. To Mary, then, who is the Mother of Mercy, and omnipotent by grace, let loving and devout appeal go up from every corner of the earth, from noble temples and tiny from royal palaces and mansions of the rich, blood-drenched plains and the seas. Let it bear to her the anguished cry of mothers and her most tender and benign solicitude may be moved, and the peace we ask for be obtained for our agitated world.
And that letter was sent out, dated the 5th of May 1917, and 8 days later the Pope received an answer.
This answer, however, did not present itself directly to the Pope, but to 3 shepherd children just outside the village of Fatima.
And it began actually in 1916. The 3 little children were prepared. The oldest, Lucia, was 10, and then her 2 cousins, Francisco, who was 9, and Jacinta, who was 7. And these 3 children saw the apparition of an angel. So here is this interior spiritual dimension already announced before the apparitions of Our Lady in the following year by the angel.
The 3 little shepherds, when they had this first apparition of the angel back in the spring of 1916, they were somehow impressed, astonished, as they were not expecting such a vision. And being normal kids as they were, playing in the fields, I would say that they also felt a little bit scared, as they could not immediately identify what it was. But then, this angel, when he appeared, the first thing he told them was, "Do not be afraid, I'm the angel of peace." And this opens up a new way for them also to perceive that they are being chosen to be also messengers and to be instruments in the hands of God for something which he wanted for the world.
And really what his role was to help the children to understand the importance of prayer and reparation. And he taught them certain prayers and really showed them the importance of making sacrifices. So he appeared to them 3 times, and on the final occasion he appeared with a host and chalice and gave the children communion.
So I think the most important thing of the apparitions of the angel was to bring to the center of the spiritual lives of the children of Fatima Jesus in the Eucharist and the importance of adoration. So through prayer life, through the life of sacrifice, and through this being connected to the center of our spiritual life, children were prepared to receive the coming of the Blessed Mother.
Well, in my opinion, these little children received a mission, a very special mission from God. They were chosen because their heart was pure and because they answered, yes, we can do it.
And then you see, as the apparitions unfolded, they responded totally to the message and to what Our Lady was asking them. And to the extent, obviously, that Jacinta, her sufferings towards the end were just incredible.
They were brought up very simply. There wasn't a school in the village at that time, but they were very well instructed in their faith by their parents.
But they were just children who lived in the outdoors, looking after the sheep. They loved nature, they loved the countryside.
Francisco was a little boy that immediately captured the essential of spiritual life. Little Jacinta, more complex, more rich. She has a great personality. All of Jacinta was the heart. She was full of passion.
Lucia was more, she was more intelligent, I think she was, because she had a wonderful memory. So, you know, her memoirs are extraordinary, and she was able to recall those memoirs into her 80s, even into her 80s. She was more serious, and Jacinta and Francisco very much loved Lucia. They felt very attracted to her. Little Francisco loved to get out and play in the country.
Like the cultural things, you know, singing, dancing, particularly the girls. So they were just natural children, really. Jacinta, really, before the apparitions, Lucia tells us in her memoirs that she was very, she could be very petulant, sort of inclined to sulk.
And Lucia says that she would quite often get into a pout, and they had to tether the donkey, as they said, to like that expression. Then they changed with, especially the apparitions of the angel, they felt, Lucia describes it, they felt sort of oppressed. They felt this great weight of the supernatural crushing them down in their spirit, so they didn't even want to talk about it. And then the apparitions of Our Lady were quite different, and they felt elevated and uplifted.
Started off on the 13th. They were just, they'd been taking the sheep, they were looking after the sheep, and they thought that it looked as if the weather was going to change, that a thunderstorm maybe was coming.
It was a flash of lightning, and they thought maybe this was going to be one of these summer thunderstorms. They didn't quite know what it was going to be, and then there was another flash of light. And then this apparition appeared to them on top of this tree.
And they saw this vision of an absolutely beautiful lady standing on top of a small tree, a home oak tree. And that was really how Fatima all started.
Well, imagine if you were one of those children and you were looking at the Virgin, and she was, Lucia says in her memoirs, more beautiful than the sun.
And she told them not to be afraid, and that really spoke to them as a mother. And that they didn't realize, obviously, it was Our Lady to begin with.
And she said, don't be afraid, I am from heaven, and I want you to come here every 13th of the month for the next 5 months, and then I will tell you who I am and what I want you to do.
During the apparitions of Fatima, the 3 children had different experiences. Lucia, the oldest one, she could see Our Lady, she could listen to Our Lady, and she was the one who used to talk with the Blessed Mother. Little Jacinta, she could also see, and she could also listening, but usually she would not talk to the Blessed Mother. Was Lucia, the one who was the interviewer. Little Francisco, he could only see the Blessed Mother. He could not listen, and he never spoke with Our Lady, as far as we know. One thing that I can tell you is when we see the children describing the Blessed Mother, the one who gives us more details is Francisco. Exactly because he was so concentrating in looking to the Blessed Mother that maybe he kept more details.
After they saw Our Lady, everything changed. They became more serious, more prayerful, and once they'd absorbed the message that she'd given them about the need for sacrifices, the need for prayer, they really focused on that, because they'd seen the light from Our Lady's hands, they'd seen, she told them they were going to heaven, So that became their whole focus then.
O meu pai era o José Pereira Laíns e jogava com o Francisco, quando eram pequeninos, eram colegas de catequese. Tudo o que eles podiam fazer era sacrifícios, e era tudo para oferecer a Jesus. Porque eles levavam a merenda numa saca, como esta, era uma saquinha, e levavam pão, azeitonas, figos secos, se calhar pevides das abóboras, queijo das ovelhas, não é? Do leite que faziam, e levavam na merendita para comer à meia da tarde. Mas se vissem os pobrezinhos passar, depois Nossa Senhora aparecer, porque antes não, antes comiam.
Depois já tudo depois.
Depois, quando eles viam passar os pobrezinhos sem comer, eles iam buscar e davam tudo. E eles ficavam sem comer nada, porque ficavam cheios de fome. Comiam bolotas. E então comiam bolotas das árvores e pronto, era assim que se saciava.
Maria Rosa, prima dos pastorinhos, do Jacinto e do Francisco. O pai dele era irmão do meu. Eu era a mãe novinha dos primos, tudo era meninos, eu era uma menina e usei o fato dela. Lembro-me da minha mãe me estar a vestir e me dizer assim: vê lá se estás boa, para como elas. Eu tenho-me portado bem, cuido eu.
Of course, the other thing to say is that in the past you've had apparitions, say La Salette, which is in the 19th century. 2 children were chosen there. Our Lady only appeared to them once for roughly about an hour, people think, and she passed on the message. But really, in the later life, those children, they went a bit off the rails. So there's always free will here, and just because the children were chosen, that doesn't necessarily mean they were bound to, respond. And obviously, but the Fatima children did respond in a wonderful way.
They were so enthusiastic, so full of joy, so happy that Lucia, from the beginning, said to Jacinta and to Francisco, we shall not say this to anyone. Lucia was a little bit reluctant to tell to others what happened with them, with the little children, because she was afraid people would not believe in her.
So, and maybe she also needed to think a little bit about what happened, because it was such a big experience for her that she needed maybe also some time to realize what happened before speaking with somebody.
But Jacinta was so happy, rejoicing. Oh, what a beautiful lady, what a beautiful lady. And Lucia was, Jacinta, I'm sure you are going to say something. Oh, no, I will not tell anything to anyone. But as soon as she saw her mother, immediately, Mom, we saw Our Lady at the Cova. So this was the beginning of everybody knowing about the apparition.
Her mother just could not believe that this could possibly have happened to Lucia, so she gave her a very hard time.
For Lucia's mother was just so unexpected that the Blessed Mother visit her family in Lucia's person that she could not believe that our Lord would conceive this such great grace to her family.
The idea of lying, and Mrs. de Santos was very, very certain that her daughter was lying right up until a long way down the line of these apparitions, and lying was desperately frowned on in that family.
But Lucia was insisting with her mother, saying, but I saw Our Lady and this is the truth, and you taught us to be honest, and I am being honest. So the life of Lucia changed a lot.
When they went up the stairway to go to the parish house, then the mother returned to her child and they said, here, what I want from you is that you tell the truth to the parish priest.
Mas a Igreja é sempre nestas circunstâncias, sucedeu com Lourdes, com La Salette, com outras aparições, também aqui em Fátima, o bispo, o pároco, ficou hesitante. Que tipo de aparições era? As manifestações, se seriam, enfim, sobrenaturais ou não.
And in the end of the first interrogatory, the first questioning, the priest said something that put on her mind many problems. He said, maybe these events are not from heaven, because usually when Our Lady comes, she ordinarily tells the visionaries to come to the local priest and tell him what happened. But on the other way, this little child does not say anything.
It's the devil.
So this was like a bad thought in Lucia's mind, and she was a little bit afraid. Was when she came home and she shared this first experience with Francisco and Jacinta. Jacinta said, oh, it's not from hell, it's not the devil, because the devil is very ugly and Our Lady is very beautiful, so this is from heaven.
And the people in the village were, very... couldn't believe that it was happening, something was happening in their village. And it was the people outside and further afield who took them more seriously, although Jacinta and Francisco's father believed more or less from the word go.
Well, I think it was a time when what Lucia was claiming was very, very scary for Mrs. dos Santos.
Years of civil unrest, led by the Republican Party, had left the country unstable and ready for a revolution. 2 years after the assassination of King Carlos, on the morning of October 5th, 1910, the Republicans, led by the Army and Navy, finally overthrew the monarchy, and a provisional Republican government was declared from the balcony of Lisbon City Hall.
There were Republicans in the government of that time which were anti-clerical, maybe because they did not want to draw people's attention and people's obedience to something else than not the state. They wanted to separate the powers.
There were bishops and priests which were sent to exile, and really life for the Catholic Church at that time in Portugal wasn't easy.
It was very severe persecution of the church. At the time of the revolution, Fatima was one of the few parts of the country where there was still, if you like, an oasis of devout, practicing Catholics who kept up their faith and understood their faith.
So maybe one reason of the rapid spreading of the message of Fatima, first in whole Portugal and then later into the world, was also the reason that at the time of the apparitions, 1917, we were at the First World War still, and many people had familiars and there fighting, and they needed something in which they could believe, and they needed something to have hope for.
And as time went on, people started to know about the apparitions, and the crowds coming along grew greater.
Well, then she came again, as she said she would, on the 13th of June.
Our Lady knew the difficulties of Lucia with her mother and with the priest, the parish priest, and she told her, you are suffering a lot. Don't be afraid.
And on that occasion, the Virgin showed them her Immaculate Heart. And round her heart, they saw a circle of thorns, signifying the sins of humanity.
And in one moment, Lucia asks one thing to Our Lady. I want you to take us to heaven. Our Lady said yes. To Jacinta and Francisco, I'll take them to heaven very soon. But you will stay here a little bit longer, because Jesus wishes to use you to spread in the world the devotion to my Immaculate Heart.
And Lucia then said, "Oh, am I going to be left alone on earth?"
And Our Lady said, "No, my daughter, I will never leave you. My Immaculate Heart will be your refuge and the way that will lead you to God." Those words changed the life of Lucia.
I think probably from the point of view of the teaching, the 13th of July is probably the most important of the apparitions.
Word had got round and a large crowd came. I think it was about 20,000 at about that time.
In July, in the apparition of July, Our Lady promised the three little children that she would perform a miracle in October. And the apparition of July was also the one where Our Lady revealed the famous Fatima secret to the three little children.
The secret of Fatima is a secret divided into three parts.
It began with this vision of hell.
You know, if they hadn't known they were going to heaven, Lucia said they would probably have died of fright.
Why did she show them hell? In order to show us through them that hell is an unfortunate possibility.
Second part of the secret are the words that Our Lady told immediately after. She said, "You saw hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wishes to establish in the world the devotion to my Immaculate Heart." So the second part of the secret of Fatima is the importance of the heart of Our Lady as a way for us to go to God. This is such an important part, and many people does not pay attention to it.
Here we come back into this global dimension where she says that if people do not cease offending God, a second war will break out, and it will be worse than the first.
Pois bem, esta foi a primeira mensagem de Nossa Senhora que se tornou divulgada. Rezar o terço todos os dias pela paz, sobretudo pela paz. Mas Nossa Senhora pediu então também a conversão, chamada, portanto, a penitência, e no dia 13 de julho, de junho já, e também de 13 de julho, Nossa Senhora mostrou o seu coração e revelou, e fez uma revelação que se os povos se não convertessem, viria outra guerra, ainda pior do que a Primeira Guerra Mundial.
Intriguingly, the children also claim that the Virgin Mary told them that this second war would be heralded by a strange, unknown light in the sky. The third part of the secret, however, was not revealed.
The third part of the secret, which is basically a vision that the children had, was kept by Sister Lucia for some time longer because she herself felt that the world was not ready for hearing this third part of the secret.
After the apparition of the 13th of July, the children changed. They became more withdrawn, more pensive. But for the outside world, they had become minor celebrities, or as Lucia would later describe, objects of curiosity, questioned by both believers and non-believers alike.
And being a secret, and when the children were questioned about it, they said, well, we are not allowed to reveal it because Our Lady told us to do so. And so we can imagine that when there is a secret, when there is something unveiled, the curiosity grows. And again, because of the political system at the time, also around Fatima, the administrators of Oran was also very curious.
The administrator of Orem was a man called Arturo dos Santos, a staunch Republican and a man with lofty ambitions.
And this man hadn't got any particular trade to his name, and he wanted to curry favour with the government down in Lisbon, so he thought he'd make a big thing and go and seize these children. He didn't say that in advance. He went over and called on them when they were, I think they'd gone to see the rector, and he arrived there in his horse and said he'd take them down, in his horse and carriage, and said he'd take them down to the covert area where Our Lady was due to appear on the 13th. And of course he made off with them, kidnapped them, and drove off to Orem, which is about 10 kilometres away, and held them there. They were quite well looked after, but they were kept in prison, and they were threatened with being tortured and put to death in a vat of boiling oil, because the mayor had heard a secret. This supposed apparition had revealed a secret. And he thought this would be marvellous. If he could get hold of this secret, then he could tell the government, oh, the whole thing is under control, I've seized the children, the apparitions will stop, and there's some secret that I've discovered, and this is it.
Of course, an authority who is not obeyed feels very upset when it happens. And so he decided to keep the children there for a couple of days in prison. And constantly threatening them, saying, well, we will kill you one by one until you tell us the truth, until you tell us the secret. But of course, they, through the strength which they received from God and through the power of their prayer, as they kept praying the rosary, also in prison, they never revealed it. And so the administrator had only one solution, which was to return them home. And this explains why Our Lady on August 13th did not appear at the Covadonga, because the three little visionaries were not there. So she then appeared when they returned at a different spot, Valinhos, on the 19th of August.
That was a very brief apparition, and she just asked them again to make prayers. Fatima is an apparition above all of prayer and penance.
And Jacinta brought a little branch of the tree for their homes. And the first woman she saw was her aunt, so Lucia's mother. And that little branch that was kept in Lucia's house started to give a special smell. So that was the first time that Lucia's mother started to think about, maybe it's true, because of the smell, of the special smell of the branch of the tree of the apparition of August.
And then in September, one more apparition, and she reminded them what she'd said in July, that the following month she was going to work a miracle so that everybody who came would see and believe.
The journalists, some of them, felt very curious, and they wanted to come to Fatima precisely also to tell people that what's happening there is nothing, you know.
One such reporter was Avelino de Almeida, chief editor for the O Século, Portugal's most influential newspaper. In all of his previous articles concerning the apparitions, Almeida had dismissed the whole thing as a consequence of society going through great tribulations, which had been intensified further by the war. He set out for Fatima, aiming to prove that there were no such things as miracles, and that the events at Fatima were nothing more than children's imaginings. On the night of the 12th of October, a fierce storm raged across Portugal. The rain turned roads to mud, yet these roads were filled with thousands of people from all over Portugal, many on foot, all making their way to the small village of Fatima.
So my parish priest, as I know, was a baby who has baptized me, was the son of a village here at 10 kilometers. And on the eve of the 13th October, many people came through his village to Fatima. And then he began to talk with the people, and they told me, we are going to Fatima because of this miracle that has been promised. And then he decided also to come to Fatima.
And my grandfather used to spend a lot of time with Francisco, knowing him very well. And one of the things which he remembered very well was precisely the miracle of the sun. On that day, he and another friend left home. It was a very rainy day. And when they reached there, they saw all these people already there. And they saw cars, which they had never seen. They saw people well-dressed and some others very poor. He had never seen as many people together as on that day. And because he was young and he knew Lucia, Francisco and Jacinta, he tried to get as close as possible to them, which he did, going through the crowd. And there he was, and he saw Lucia was already praying the rosary, waiting for Our Lady. And then at a certain moment, Lucia turned her head back to the crowd and said, "Look up in the sky because Our Lady is coming." My grandfather also looked. He did not see Our Lady, but he realized that the atmosphere was dense. Something special was happening there, not just because Lucia became very focused and looking at the little old oak tree, but also because people were praying, and even the atmosphere was kind of changing.
Of all the eyewitness accounts of that day, 3 of the most detailed would be provided by Dr. Almeida Garrett, Maria Dogamo, and Avelino de Almeida.
It must have been 1:30 p.m. when there arose from the exact spot where the children were a column of smoke, thin, fine, and bluish. And it rose perhaps 2 meters above their heads and then evaporated. This phenomenon, perfectly visible to the naked eye, must have lasted a matter of seconds. I didn't note it down, so I don't know whether it was a minute or less than a minute. The smoke dissipated abruptly, and then it came back again a second and a third time.
We come to the final apparition where Our Lady revealed who she was. I am the Lady of the Rosary. Every apparition, all 6 apparitions, she had requested people to pray the Rosary every day. And there is a profound reason for that. This is totally in harmony with the teaching of the Church going back centuries, until right from the time in the 13th century, I think it was, when St. Dominic was inspired by Our Lady to preach the Rosary against the Albigensians. There's a whole history of that which is well known and documented. The very final part of the final apparition, the children saw the Holy Family. St. Joseph appeared with the child Jesus. The child Jesus blessed the world, and then Lucia saw Our Lady as Our Lady of Sorrows, and then finally as Our Lady of Mount Carmel. But while that was going on, as perceived by the children, the crowd experienced this extraordinary miracle of the sun.
We saw the huge cloud turn towards the sun, which appeared at its zenith, clear of the clouds.
And at that moment, my parish priest said, at that moment I saw the sun was spinning around, and I only had the time to kneel on the mat and say, my God, pardon me, I'm dying here.
It could not be confused with a sun seen through a fog, for it was neither veiled nor dim. At Fatima, it kept its light and heat.
It resembled a flat plate of silver, and it was possible to stare at it without the least discomfort. It did not burn the eyes, it did not blind.
The most astonishing thing was to be able to stare at the solar disk for a long time, brilliant with light and heat, without hurting the eyes or damaging the retina.
Then, a tremendous cry rang out, and the crowd nearest to us were heard to shout, "Miracle, miracle, marvel, marvel." Before the dazzled eyes of the people, whose attitude transported us back to biblical times and who, dumbfounded, heads uncovered, contemplated the blue of the sky.
And when I looked up, suddenly the sun began to tremble and to shake with a sudden movement and to turn on itself at an incredible speed.
It made strange, abrupt movements outside of all cosmic laws.
And while it did that, it was throwing out light, rays of light, of all colors of the rainbow.
The sun danced.
And my grandfather also felt a little bit scared. He knelt on the mat with his friend, but he looked at the sun, and he was impressed that the sun did not blind him. And so he also prayed. And one thing which he always told me is that, well, at a certain moment I feel at peace. I feel that what was happening there, although I didn't have much time to think about it, I felt something in my heart which was telling me what is happening here is from God.
And then it appeared to descend towards the crowd.
It seemed to detach itself from the sky and to rush towards us.
As the sun descended towards the earth and they thought it was the end of the world, it was that striking, that they felt the heat of the sun as it came closer and closer.
And it must have been very alarming indeed. And they threw themselves on their knees into the thick mud. And there are photographs, contemporary photographs of the crowd showing their expressions, looking up into the sky, looking at this extraordinary phenomenon taking place.
It was very near the people, and then it continued to turn to the opposite direction, going back to its own natural position.
And what they found was that the ground had been absolutely soaked because it had been a terrible storm the night before, and it was still raining that morning. And as the sun went back up and they felt the heat, all their clothes were dried and the ground was dry.
And then he looked at the mud, everything was dry. So, something which for kids as they were, they could not explain. They had not education to apply any laws of the physics, and this was really a miracle for him. And from that day onwards, he also decided to pray the rosary every day, and so he was also converted, so to say.
My father was from a village there, some 20 kilometers from here. And then in the evening of that 13th October, he came to meet his mother on the way. And when he met her, he asked, Mother, did you see Our Lady? No, my son, I did not see Our Lady, but I did see the sun that was spinning around. So, and he described the same thing as my parish priest.
Well, the miracle of the sun was alleged to be a hallucination. And we know that that can't be right, because it was seen over an area of 600 square miles. 20 people in many villages outside Fatima saw the miracle of the sun, and also there were present those who came to mock and scoff at the church and say this was just a Catholic sort of hoax in order to delude the simple, gullible faithful who were just being taken in by their priests. Well, of course, it wasn't put on by the priests to start off with. Some of these free thinkers actually had to testify that they did see this miracle take place.
Was it a miracle, as the people shouted, or was it natural phenomenon, as the experts say? For the moment, that does not concern me. I am only saying what I saw. The rest is a matter for science and for the church.
The most relevant fact maybe is that it was predicted many months before, 3 months before, not only the exact place, but the exact day and the exact time, and that's impossible to predict something like this with so much time before.
Then you've got the secular people who say, well, it was just an hallucination, there's no hard evidence for it, but really they're people who've just looked at Fatima superficially. And you can't really dismiss it as an hallucination, because not only did the people on the spot see the miracle and the ground dried and they felt as though there was something happening, but people, 10, 15 miles away, not expecting to see anything, saw the miracle. I mean, there's one report of a priest who was, as a youngster, in a village, I think about 10 miles away from Fatima, and they were all in school, and suddenly they realized something was happening outside, and they thought it was the end of the world too. They were frightened, and they realized what had happened. Once all these points are examined, you just cannot, you're left with something supernatural.
Recently unearthed in a small bookshop was a postcard written by Avelino de Almeida, addressed to his sister on the evening of the 13th of October, 1917.
"13th of October. Dear Agustina, I saw extraordinary things, which later I tell you. There were about 40,000 people. Regards for all, and a big hug for you. Tomorrow, Sunday, I must be in Lisbon. Avelino."
Minha mãe me contava e contava às pessoas amigas que assistiu em outubro ao milagre do sol e que queria apanhar flores de cima que caíam, mas não conseguia. Minha mãe também assistiu a várias aparições e dizia ela que ouviu ela dizer, as crianças dizerem: lá vem ela, mas minha mãe não viu Nossa Senhora, ouviu as crianças dizer: lá vem ela, e tudo ficava a olhar ao céu, porque qualquer coisa de importante houve naquele momento. E minhas tias, meus familiares, também assistiram a várias aparições de Fátima.
Yeah, my grandfather he passed away a few years ago. He was 94 years old. And in the last years of his life, I used to go to his home, sit next to him and hear all these stories. And he used to tell me, when I was already a grown-up boy, say, well, Nuno, you have an important mission, because I was contemporary to the apparitions. I met the little shepherds. I had this opportunity to live with them and also to learn from them what Our Lady wanted. But I don't know how to read or how to write. I never went to school. And if I had the chance to be able to tell other people what Our Lady had asked in Fatima, I would be very pleased. I can't, but I entrust you with this mission, because I know with your studies and you'll have an important role to tell people how important this message is for today's world.
My grandmother told me the story that she heard from Jacinta's mother, that at one of the apparitions Our Lady of Fatima told to the children that the war was going to end soon. And Jacinta was particularly happy to hear this, because one older brother of Jacinta and Francisco was in war at that time. He was a soldier, and they had no news from him. They would not know if he would be okay or not. So when Jacinta heard the message from Our Lady saying that the war was going to end and that the soldiers would return home, she was very happy. And at dinner time, she told her mother that Our Lady told Jacinta that the war was going to end, and this would mean for the little girl that her brother Manel, he would come home soon and he would be hungry. So she told her mother to put always one plate more on the table so that the brother would have something to eat.
13 months after the miracle of the sun, on the 11th of November 1918, the First World War finally came to an end. Amongst the returning Portuguese soldiers was Manuel Mato, the brother of Francisco and Jacinta. But for the family of the little shepherds, the happiness would be short-lived, for in 1919, an influenza pandemic that had spread like wildfire around the globe reached the village of Aljustrel. It became known as the Spanish flu and was the worst pandemic in recorded history. Francisco was the first to succumb and died peacefully at his home on the 4th of April 1919, having refused any kind of hospital treatment. Jacinta closely followed. After being taken to a number of hospitals in a desperate bid to save her life, she died alone on February 20th, 1920, in a hospital in Lisbon. Arriving to take her body the following morning, the undertaker, Antonio Almeida, was unprepared for what he found. He reported that he noticed blood stains on her cheek and pillow, indicating that in her dying moments she had wept tears of blood. But that was not the only unusual thing that had struck him about the body of Jacinta Mato.
I can still see the little angel. Laid in the casket, she seemed to be still alive, in her full beauty, with rosy cheeks and lips. I have seen many corpses in my business, young and old. Never had I ever seen anything of this sort before or since. One remembers the smell which so often makes it repugnant to remain near a corpse, and yet this child had been dead for 3 days and a half. The smell of her body was like a bouquet of flowers.
And her body was brought to the cemetery of Orem. But in one point in 1935, her body was taken from the cemetery of Orem to the cemetery of Fatima. In that time, it was September the 12th, they opened the coffin and the body was incorrupted. Someone took a picture of this and they sent to Sister Lucia. She was already in Spain, and when she saw that picture, she was so happy that she said, I was feeling like I opened the rest of the veil so I could see the body of my little friend. That was the picture who gave the idea to the bishop to ask Lucia to write everything she knew about Jacinta. So that picture was the origin of Fatima in Lucia's own words book. So it's a very precious picture. Second, in 1951, April 30, it was the second time that the body of Jacinta was opened to transport the body from the cemetery of Fatima to the Basilica of Our Lady of the Rosary in the shrine of Our Lady of Fatima. And at that second time, the body was still incorrupt, the same way. So the coffin was opened twice, as far as we know, and those twice times the body was completely incorrupt. One of the most important characteristics of Jacinta is that she was feeling committed to everything she saw. Our society is very, oh, that's not my problem. Oh, who cares? Oh, that's nothing to me. Jacinta is the opposite. She was feeling committed to everything she could see. Francisco has a sentence that it's like a summary of his own charisma. He says, I loved to see the angel, but I loved most to see Our Lady. But what I truly liked to see the most was Jesus, in that light that Our Lady put us in the chest, in the heart. We live in a very competitive society. We need to be the first one in everything. The best in school, the best in anything we do, we have to be the best. And if we are not the best, then we are sad or frustrated. Francisco was not like that. He was humble. He accepted his limits. He accepted that his mission was different from the sister, Jacinta, and from the cousin, Lucia, and it was all right. For him, it was not a problem that he could not listen to Our Lady. So that model of humility is so important to us.
As foretold by the children themselves, only one of them now remained. In 1921, the Bishop of Leiria, the diocese to which Fatima belongs, recommended that Lucia be taken immediately to the Dorothean sisters of Vilar in Porto, as he believed that her presence of Fatima would interfere with the Church's investigations to determine the validity of the apparitions. For the 14-year-old Lucia, it meant an escape from the almost continuous harassment and interrogation she had come to endure from the growing influx of curious crowds. She remained there for 4 years, and then on the 24th of October 1925, she entered the Institute of the Sisters of St. Dorothy in the convent in Toy in Spain. She would spend 21 years as a Dorothean sister, and would later write that during this time she received further private revelations from the Virgin Mary that gave her a greater insight into the message of Fatima. In 1948, Lucia entered the Carmelite convent of St. Teresa in Coimbra and took the name Sister Maria Lucia of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart. Here, she would spend the rest of her life, living as a virtual recluse. On the night of the 25th of January, 1938, Lucia peered out of her convent window and saw a strange red light dancing across the sky. This light was seen all across Europe, and many eyewitnesses described the sky as looking as though it were on fire. The New York Times reported,
Emblazoned in the northern sky, the light brought thousands of telephone calls to Swiss and French authorities, asking whether it was a fire, war, or the end of the world.
Scientists described it as a particularly brilliant display of the aurora borealis. But Lucia believed it to be the unknown light that had formed part of the prophecy given to her on the 13th of July in 1917. A week after the aurora display, Adolf Hitler promoted himself to military chief in Germany. lighting the match that would set the world aflame once more.
Portugal was not involved in the Second World War, so Portugal was a neutral country after the Second World War. And as a sign of thanksgiving, the Portuguese women collected jewelries all over the country and offered them to Our Lady of Fatima as thanksgiving that the husbands, the sons and the brothers did not went to the Second World War. And these jewelries were used to make one of the crowns of the statue of Our Lady of Fatima.
And really, you could say, within about 25 years, Portugal was completely transformed.
Os bispos que tinham sido expulsos e exilados puderam regressar às suas dioceses e, a pouco foram restabelecidas as relações diplomáticas entre Portugal e a Santa Sé.
I would like to say that Fatima has changed. For the moment, I think Fatima has not changed very much. In the exterior, yes. Outside appearance, of course. So it's a city today. But in the interior, Fatima, I think is the same.
Fatima has become the altar of the world. That's the name that Fatima is known in the world. Fatima is a place of peace with so many pilgrims every year who come to gather in the Fatima celebrations, especially from May to October.
Nós aqui no santuário fazemos small boletim, pequeno boletim, que se chama Fátima Light and Peace. E é feito em 7 diferentes línguas. A mim, o que me impressiona não é nas primeiras páginas escrevermos os relatos do que acontece aqui trimestralmente, mas é as cartas que nos chegam de conversões, novos santuários, novas vocações. Ainda há pouco tempo demos notícia de que existe em Timor-Leste, em East Timor, uma maternidade-escola que tem a designação Nossa Senhora de Fátima. Ou seja, por exemplo, neste caso, no mundo da saúde, são atualmente 93 as instituições que têm Nossa Senhora de Fátima na sua designação. Depois a isto juntam-se os santuários, igrejas, escolas, universidades. Quer dizer, são coisas que quem está fora daqui sentem pequenino nos seus lugares, mas visto de uma forma global, é mesmo a mensagem de Fátima a tocar no coração das pessoas.
the Fatima message is a message of a mother who is speaking to her children and is saying, okay, people, look, you are not on the right track, and I will show you what is right, and I will show you how to get peace in the world, so it's still relevant as it was.
On May the 13th, 2000, Fatima once again found itself in the glare of the media's spotlight when Pope John Paul II made an official visit to the shrine to declare Jacinta and Francisco Mato blessed, which would mean they were now one step away from sainthood. Over 1 million people attended the ceremonial mass, including a 92-year-old Lucia Santos. It was to everyone's astonishment that John Paul suddenly announced he would also finally reveal to the public the third part of the secret of Fatima.
The third part of the secret has two parts. In the first part, they saw an angel with a flaming sword trying to reach and touch the earth, representing the justice of God. But at the same time, the flames could not touch the earth because Our Lady was there. And with her right hand, she put the hand in front of the flames, and she avoided the contact of the flames. So at the same time, the angel cried out 3 times, penance, penance, penance. Then they saw a man, a bishop, dressed in white, which they understood it was the Holy Father, crossing a city half in ruins, followed by a great multitude of people.
All the church is leading its way, its crossway to a mountain, and on that mountain towards a big cross, and the Pope was in front of the procession, and then the bishops, priests, and the lay people, men and women.
So this represents the church following the Pope to God, to Christ in the cross. When the Pope arrives at the feet of the cross, he kneels to pray. He is murdered, shot with guns and arrows. And after him, many people were also killed and murdered. Under the arms of the cross, there were 2 angels that would recollected the blood of the martyrs.
This blood serves to purify the souls that want to approach God. So these souls were in the city that the Holy Father has walked through, and this was a half-destroyed city. I think it is a very good sign for our world, in this 21st century. So, in fact, we are a half-destroyed city.
The Pope crossing the city half in ruins, which can represent our world, our civilization, as the moral values are so in ruins, and the church following the Pope with a lot of suffering. It's the long Via Crucis, Stations of the Cross of the Church of the 20th century. There were more martyrs on the 20th century alone than in all the other 19th centuries of the Church. So what the children saw was the great suffering of the Pope and the Church. And the third aspect is the importance of the blood of the martyrs to help those who are trying to follow Christ.
John Paul II believed that the events prophesied in the third part of the secret referred directly to events in his own life. In fact, so convinced was he that he would become known as the Fatima Pope.
Tudo indica que o Papa João Paulo II, aliás, são vários os livros e as biografias que falam nisso, que até determinada época da sua vida não tinha nem um grande conhecimento, nem um grande interesse por Fátima. e que a ligação vem exatamente, nasce a partir do dia 13 de maio de 1981, do atentado na Praça de São Pedro.
The Pope was shot 3 times and critically wounded as he entered St. Peter's Square in a slow-moving convertible vehicle. Mehmet Ali Adza, a trained sniper from Turkey, was immediately apprehended and later sentenced to life in prison by an Italian court.
Há quem diga que alguns dias depois mandou o seu secretário pedir portanto, o texto da terceira parte do segredo que se encontrava na congregação da doutrina da fé, mas que a partir daquele momento, do facto de haver uma coincidência entre o dia do atentado e o dia 13 de maio, que nunca mais esta ideia de Fátima e de Nossa Senhora de Fátima lhe saiu da sua mente. Portanto, houve ali uma mudança na sua vida e uma consciência plena desta ligação entre a Igreja e Fátima, entre a sua própria vida pessoal e Fátima, entre o Papa e Fátima, que terá sido uma mudança que depois se notava muitíssimo claramente, tanto nas suas atitudes, e foram muitos os gestos em que manifestou isso, desde o facto de ter vindo a Fátima 3 vezes, o facto de ter mandado ir a imagem de Nossa Senhora de Fátima a Roma por 2 vezes, o facto de ter feito a consagração do mundo ao coração imaculado de Maria, o facto de ter beatificado os 2 pastorinhos, Francisco e Jacinta Marto, um processo que já se arrastava há bastantes décadas, e de ter, por assim dizer, sido quase uma intervenção pessoal do Papa, que admite esta possibilidade de as crianças também poderem vir a ser beatificadas e, portanto, aberta a porta para a canonização.
It was in, I think, 1997, in October, that John Paul II wrote a letter to the Bishop of Fatima for the 80th anniversary of the miracle of the Sun. And he said that this distinguished Fatima as one of the great signs of the times.
O Papa teve uma certa convicção de que a história do século XX, particularmente na Europa, estava intimamente ligada à mensagem de Fátima. E depois o facto de o Papa ter esta ligação tão forte a Nossa Senhora. Sentiu-se sempre um homem intimamente ligado a Nossa Senhora. E depois, a certa altura, a Nossa Senhora de Fátima, a partir do acontecimento do atentado de 1981.
On his first pilgrimage to Fatima, Pope John Paul II took with him the bullet that was meant to kill him and had it placed into the golden crown that adorns the Virgin statue. It sits, a prized jewel amongst all the precious gems that make up its collection. A powerful testimony to how the life of John Paul became so intrinsically linked to Fatima.
O Papa Bento XVI olha Fátima mais do ponto de vista do teólogo que reflete, que pensa, que interpreta. Foi ele, de facto, que fez a interpretação da terceira parte do Segredo de Fátima e nesse texto ele, de facto, revela conhecer em profundidade tudo aquilo que a Fátima diz respeito. Podemos dizer que não parece ser tanto uma ligação a Fátima do ponto de vista emocional, do ponto de vista do coração, por se sentir envolvido no mistério de Fátima, como aconteceu com João Paulo II, mas mais do âmbito da razão, da reflexão, da doutrina e da teologia, onde há, de facto, do nosso ponto de vista, uma aprovação muito clara de tudo aquilo que tem a ver com a doutrina e com a teologia que brotam de Fátima.
On the 13th of February 2005, Lucia passed away. She was 97 years old. The day of her funeral was declared a day of national mourning in Portugal. Her body was laid to rest in a shrine at Fatima, alongside the bodies of Jacinta and Francisco.
The life of this woman was constantly to be faithful to the mission she received. When she writes the book, Fatima in Lucia's own words, it's obviously that she's hiding herself behind the words, because she's an humble woman.
We have never spoken of her experience on the apparitions. She couldn't speak because the Holy Father, the Vatican, had prohibited her. And she told me that it was very good, the prohibition. Otherwise, all people would like to speak to her about the apparition.
I met personally Sister Lucia 5 times, and I spoke with her for 5 times, briefly, after 2000. And of course, we could not speak about this because she could not speak about the message of Fatima. But I could feel that the life of this woman was to carry on this mission that was given to her in 1917.
Yes, I think the message of Our Lady of Fatima back in 1917 has now, today, an impact for the world. Independently if you are Catholic or if you don't even believe in God. Why? Because what is said here has to do with our own being, the way we behave. It asks us really to be committed, to be involved in the project which is building our own society.
De facto, a Igreja precisa de alguns lugares e de alguns pontos de convergência em que, de algum modo, se possam encontrar pessoas das mais variadas proveniências, com uma consciência da fé também muito variada, mais crentes, menos crentes, com uma fé muito esclarecida, com uma fé pouco esclarecida, até de diferentes confissões religiosas que, na pessoa de Nossa Senhora de Maria, conseguem encontrar alguns pontos de sintonia.
Our Lady is a very important figure in the Church, and the Immaculate Heart of Our Lady is a very good symbol and reality, and that we have God in our hearts and we are able to correct ourselves through the grace of God and also through penance, through the sacrifices of daily life, of brotherly life, because the most important sacrifice in our life are the brotherly, are the sacrifice necessary to peace.
I think the message of Fatima has spoken so much about peace and the end of wars, and peace is a universal message.
To peace with our brothers and sisters, to peace in the family, to peace in our own heart, peace in our own heart. I think this is the mystery of God.
Me contavam, e eu acredito que Nossa Senhora que apareceu aqui. Não vi, mas acredito porque vêm pessoas de todo o mundo tocadas para vir a Fátima. Por isso, eu acredito que Nossa Senhora que esteve aqui muito presente, porque chama todo mundo a vir a Fátima. Há algo que os toca no coração para vir cá. Por vezes eu estou na capelinha e penso como esta mãe entende as línguas todas e todos estão a olhar, talvez a pedir por familiares, pela saúde, por os familiares, por algum amigo, por tudo. Por isso, eu acredito que Nossa Senhora esteve aqui. Eu acredito. E sou muito feliz de ter acreditado.
You know, people are suffering a lot today of these moves on their lives, special marriage life, professional life, all these displacements on the world. People are suffering a lot in their hearts, and they come here also to tell those sufferings to Our Lady and to become consoled, to be consoled by God. Consolation is a very interesting theme, I think, in the Fatima message.
The most important in the Fatima apparitions was the message that Our Lady gave to the children. And this message is a universal message, and it's a very simple message. It's like a mother speaking to her children. It's a mother who says, I will take care of you, and I want you to be on the right track. I want you to have a good life. I want you to live in peace and in harmony. And this is such a simple message, but with so much power behind it, that everybody can understand this. And that's what everybody wants for his life. Catholics or non-Catholics, if there are wars and chaos and distraction, all people suffer.
And if you look back the way these three little children live this message, we realize that it has changed their lives, first of all, and it's now a call for us to change our lives as well. And the relevance is that when Our Lady asked us to pray the Rosary every day and asked us that through prayer we can achieve peace, then we have here the instruments which we need for our world.
De facto, a história de Fátima ainda não está completamente feita. Eu penso que é uma história ainda a fazer-se e a descobrir-se.
It's believing truly that the good will have the last word, like the Blessed Mother said. In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. This is the message of Fatima, a message of hope for our times. It's like a light in the middle of so much darkness.
People, when they come to Fatima, the pilgrims, they say that they feel in peace, that they feel harmony when they are at the shrine of Fatima. For example, during the candlelight procession, there are so many people who come just as tourists, as curious people, and not as pilgrims. But they say when they are there and they see all the candles, they see the Fatima hymns, they feel something inside, they feel peace. So that's what Fatima is for the world.
Today, the story of Fatima echoes across the world. And for millions of people, it has become a beacon of hope. In later life, Father Schiffer, the Jesuit priest who had survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima in 1945, wrote of his experience.
Prayer is more powerful than the atom bomb. It promotes and deepens the spirit of human brotherhood. Atom-bombed Hiroshima's answer to Our Lady's plea is a crusade of prayer. The shrine for world peace in the heart of Hiroshima stands as a symbol of this unity. Let us hope that the children who are now playing in its shadow will grow up into a world of peace which we have prepared for them.
Good